Marcus wanted to believe that, but he wasn't sure if it was true. Leah had always been strong and the one who led them through the darkest moments. But even the strongest people had their breaking points, and Marcus feared Leah had reached hers. Yet, her resilience was a beacon of hope, inspiring Marcus and everyone around her. He stood up from the desk, his legs feeling weak beneath him. "I need to see her." Peter's eyes narrowed slightly. "Marcus, maybe it's better if you give her some space. She's been through a lot." Marcus shook his head. "I need to see her," he repeated, more firmly this time. Without waiting for Peter's response, Marcus walked out of the office and down the narrow hallway toward the small room where Leah was resting. His heart pounded in his chest as he approached the door, his hand hovering over the doorknob. He wasn't sure what he would say or if he even had the right to be here after everything that had happened. But he couldn't stay away. He pushed the door open gently, the creak of the hinges echoing in the silent room. As he stepped inside, the tension in the air was palpable, like a storm about to break. The room was dark, the only light coming from a single lamp on the bedside table. Leah lay on the bed, her face pale against the sheets, her dark hair fanned out around her. She looked fragile in a way Marcus had never seen before, her usual strength and fire diminished by the horrors she had endured. Marcus stood frozen in the doorway for a moment, unsure of what to do. He wanted to go to her, to comfort her, but he wasn't sure if she wanted that from him. He had failed to protect her when she needed him most. How could she ever forgive him for that? The fear of her rejection was like a weight on his chest, making breathing hard. "Marcus," Leah's voice was soft, barely a whisper, but it cut through the silence like a blade. He stepped closer, his heart aching at the sight of her. "Leah, I don't want to talk about it," she interrupted, her voice shaky but firm. Marcus stopped in his tracks, his chest tightening. He had expected her to be angry, to blame him for what had happened. But her words, her tone, were even worse than the anger he had anticipated. There was a distance in her voice, a coldness he had never heard from her. "Leah," he said softly, sitting down on the edge of the bed, "I'm sorry. I should have gotten there sooner. I should have." "It doesn't matter," she said, her voice a mix of resignation and disappointment. "What's done is done." Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of their shared history and the choices Marcus had made. Marcus felt his throat tighten. He wanted to argue, to tell her that it did matter, that he could have saved her from all of this if only he had been faster, brighter, better. But he could see in her eyes that she didn't want to hear it. She didn't want to relive the nightmare of what had happened to her. For a long moment, they sat silently, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on them. Finally, Leah spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I heard what you did." Marcus frowned, unsure of what she meant. "What do you mean?" "The broadcast," she said, her eyes flickering toward him. "You went live. You exposed Nero." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. He had known she would find out eventually, but hearing her say it, knowing that she had watched it all unfold, made it feel more natural. "I had to," Marcus said quietly. It was the only way to stop him. Leah's eyes were unreadable as she stared at him, her expression a mixture of gratitude and something else, something darker. "You saved the city," she said, her voice steady. "You brought down Nero's regime." Marcus shook his head, his chest tightening. "I didn't save anything, Leah. Not really. Nero's still out there, and he won't stop until he destroys everything." Leah's gaze hardened. "Then we'll have to stop him." Marcus blinked, surprised by the determination in her voice. Despite everything she had been through, despite the pain and the suffering, Leah wasn't giving up. She wasn't backing down. But Marcus wasn't so sure anymore. "Leah," he said softly, "what if this is all for nothing? What if we stop Nero, but the next tyrant takes his place? What if—" "Don't," Leah interrupted, her voice sharp. "Don't do that. Don't start doubting everything now, not after everything we've been through." Marcus stared at her, his heart heavy with conflicting emotions. He had spent so long fighting for power, for control, but now, in the face of everything that had happened, he wasn't sure if it was worth it anymore. What good was power if it only brought more destruction? More pain? Leah sat up slightly, wincing as she adjusted herself on the bed. Her eyes never left Marcus's, and for a moment, they just stared at each other, the weight of their shared experiences hanging between them. "We're so close, Marcus," Leah said quietly. "We're so close to bringing Nero down. You can't lose faith now." Marcus swallowed hard, his throat tight. He wanted to believe her and think that they were on the verge of something great that would change the course of history. But the weight of the past few days, bloodshed, and loss all felt like too much. "I'm not sure I have any faith left," Marcus admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Leah's expression softened, and she reached out and took his hand for the first time since he had entered the room. Her gentle but firm touch grounded him in a way he hadn't expected. "Then borrow some of mine," she said softly. Marcus felt a lump form in his throat. He didn't deserve her faith or kindness after everything he had failed to do. But at that moment, as her hand gripped him, he realized he wasn't in this fight alone. That may be enough. Later that night, as Marcus lay awake in the small, darkened room of the safe house, the past few days' events played repeatedly in his mind. Leah's words echoed in his thoughts but couldn't drown out the fear and uncertainty that gnawed at him. Nero was still out there. Despite the broadcast, despite the rising tide of rebellion, the man who had orchestrated so much destruction was still lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike back. Marcus knew that Nero wasn't the type to go down without a fight, and if they didn't find him soon, the consequences could be catastrophic. As Marcus stared at the ceiling, his mind drifted to Leah. She was still fragile, still recovering from the ordeal Nero's men had put her through, but her resolve was unshaken. She had survived, and that survival had only strengthened her determination to finish what they had started. Marcus wished he could be as sure as she was. But doubt had begun to creep into his mind like a dark cloud that threatened to blot out everything else. The weight of leadership and responsibility was heavier than he had ever imagined, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure if he was strong enough to carry it. The following day, Peter found Marcus in the courtyard outside the safe house. The air was crisp, the sun barely rising over the horizon, casting a pale light over the city below. "They found Nero's location," Peter said without preamble, his voice tense. Marcus's heart skipped a beat. "Where?" "A bunker outside the city," Peter replied, handing Marcus a map. "He's holed up with a small group of his most loyal soldiers. It won't be easy, but we have one chance to end this." Marcus stared at the map, his mind racing. This was it. The final push. The moment they had been working toward for so long. But the doubt still lingered. "Are you ready for this?" Peter asked, his voice softer now. Marcus looked up, meeting Peter's gaze. He wasn't sure if he was ready. He wasn't sure if he would ever be prepared. But he knew one thing: he couldn't let Nero win, not after everything. "I'm ready," Marcus said, his voice steady. And as the sun rose higher in the sky, casting a golden glow over Rome, Marcus knew there was no turning back. Chapter 12. The world had changed, but Li Gregorio felt as though she had not moved at all. The city of Rome lay beneath her, a patchwork of rubble and recovery, of destruction and rebuilding. The air was thick with the scent of smoke, a lingering reminder of Nero's reign, and though the fires had been extinguished, the scars remained. The skyline was jagged, broken by crumbling buildings and charred ruins, yet life was beginning to return to the streets. But Leah couldn't feel it. She stood at the edge of the overlook, the wind tugging at her hair as she stared out at the horizon, her heart heavy with loss. The victory over Nero felt hollow. They had won, yes, but at what cost? Peter was dead, the man who had been her mentor, her guide, and in many ways, her moral compass. His death had shattered something inside her, something that couldn't be easily mended. And then there was Marcus. Leah had watched him change over the past few months, watched him transform from a man who had wielded power for selfish gain into someone willing to risk everything for a cause that wasn't his own. He had stood beside her in the darkest moments, had exposed Nero's lies to the world, and had fought to save her when all seemed lost. But even now, in the aftermath, Leah wasn't sure if she could fully trust him. She wasn't sure if he could truly change. The question that had haunted her for so long echoed in her mind, relentless and unforgiving: "Where are you going?" She wasn't sure if she was asking herself or Marcus. Behind her, the soft sound of footsteps broke the silence. Leah didn't need to turn to know who it was. She could feel Marcus's presence like a shadow, always lingering just at the edge of her awareness. Leah, Marcus's voice was soft, hesitant, as though he wasn't sure if she wanted him there. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she let the silence stretch between them, heavy and unspoken, as the wind whipped around them. She had never been one to avoid difficult conversations, but now, standing on the precipice of a new world, she wasn't sure where to begin. After a long moment, she spoke, her voice quiet and strained. "It's over." Marcus stepped closer, coming to stand beside her at the overlook. His expression was somber, the weight of everything they had been through etched into the lines of his face. "It's over," he agreed, though his tone carried a hint of uncertainty. "But it doesn't feel like it, does it?" Leah shook her head. "No. It doesn't." The two of them stood in silence for a moment, gazing out at the city below. Marcus could feel the tension in Leah's posture, the grief that hung heavy between them. Peter's death had hit her harder than anything else, and Marcus wasn't sure if she would ever forgive herself for it.